Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Steve Parke. He's the founder of Parke Personal Training, built on the belief that everyone should have access to support and accountability for their fitness goals. He's also previously competed in bodybuilding and has also helped schools with children with learning challenges. As always, I'll put links to Parke and anything else we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. Much appreciated.
No worries at all. Where I wanted to kick this show off with is, as we dug through your profile, you live in Leicester, and you grew up in Leicester, which is not very far away from where I live.
No.
What I wanted to know really is, what was Leicester like in the 1970s and going to school in the 70s in Leicester?
Oh, see, that seems like so long ago. I think the younger people would literally say it's black and white. You know, when kids see stuff on TV, they think it's not in black and white, literally.
Yeah, but everything's steam-driven.
Yeah, steam-driven and black and white on chalkboards and stuff, old school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I must admit, it was a really... I mean, I would say I loved it, because you always do that kind of thing when you're a kid, and then you lament back into your childhood days, and you felt like the summers were hotter, they were longer. you know, your school break, your school holiday, summer breaks were longer and everything. But I had that. So there was the dichotomy of that lovely side of things, just being a child and a kid growing up and not having any worries. Yeah. But then there was the difficulty of being sort of the son and the daughter, obviously, in regard to my sister Nicola, of immigrants, essentially.
Right.
You know, coming into Leicester in the Windrush generation. And then there's a whole adjusting of that and being, I guess, essentially being teased for that aspect, for sort of a different tone of skin, different color skin, but then also being dyslexic and not having that sort of even come to a reality until in my 20s or 30s, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite challenging in certain aspects, but there were also classes and sort of school teachers that I really loved, and they managed to see the magic in me. You know, they sort of, you know, there's something different with Steve. He may not be great at essentially reading, writing, maths, but he is gifted in such and such an area.
Okay. And how did you find the teasing? Because you mentioned like basically almost three pillars, isn't there? The Windrush generation, skin colour, and, you know, diversity. Now, each of them must get teased very, very differently, but which were the ones that you would have struggled most with, and how does neurodiversity fit into all that?
Yeah, I think for that, it was definitely, I'd probably say I'd say 1 and 2, because it was sort of the racial aspect of things initially. And then also, as I was younger, sort of before my bodybuilding days and my trading days, I was typically the super small, chubby kid that got teased, you know, never first to be picked for football or rugby, that kind of thing. So there was always that aspect. So it was probably, I would say, those two elements were the initial stage. And then moving on to the dyslexia and the sort of neurodiversity when I moved into the classroom side of things. And then even down to the point where my mum, she was really light skinned. So my sister took after my mum with a lighter skin. I took after my daddy with a darker skin. So I remember even being in primary school, one of the kids would tease me relentlessly for being, you know, sort of big, you know, a big guy. But then when my sister started, he would tease her as well, because they just couldn't get it into the head that we were brother and sister because our skin tone was different. So it was an addition of that, really. But again, sort of on the flip side of that, I had some really lovely teachers that really boosted my self-esteem. So it's kind of those things sort of ebbed it down. But there were other teachers that kind of built it up. And then my mommy and daddy were always just like, you can do whatever you want. You know, like they were our best cheerleaders, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that. And that it's really important to have that, because particularly as you're talking about, you've got all of the physical teasing before you've even opened the book and put the pen on the page.
Yeah.
And then you just keep adding things in, and then stuff with your sister. There's a lot going on really in your life as a young person.
Yeah, it was all that sort of anxiety. So before you even, you know, put on your school shoes or your school uniform, you're already anxious. You're already sort of up to a level 10 anxiety before you even walk out the door. So, and then it's that, you know how it is, that sort of thing where if you've had a good day, you're kind of on a high and you hope that good day follows on to the next day. But then if you've had 4 bad days, you kind of automatically think that 5th day is going to be a bad one, kind of thing.
Yeah. How did you cope with all that? Because that's a lot to put on a pair of young shoulders.
It is, yeah. And I think looking back on it, it was, you know, so you're sort of looking back on it with adult eyes. You think, how did I manage it? But again, I think it's one of those things that sometimes when you go through a horrible situation, somehow you just manage it. It may not be pretty, it may not be super scientific, but you get through it. And I knew every time that I would come home, there'd be, because the sort of area we grew up in was an area called Wishy in Leicester. So my mum and dad, oddly enough, they were the first people to buy the first plot in that area. So they were they were like the foundational house of the whole estate, which
house
was kind of cool.
Yeah,
house number 1, plot number 1 sort of thing. So we always had a really lovely home environment, not only just home as far as inside, but all the kids went to the same school, all my mates went to the same school. And even back then in the 70s, in that estate, we had a really lovely, diverse mix of cultures. So, you know, we had white families, Black, Asian, Muslim, Chinese, just basically, you know, it was a street of every mix. So we as kids literally just learned to get on with each other. Like if we thought somebody was cool and we liked them and they were a nice person, we got on with them. If you're a horrible person, we didn't. So there was no color barriers. It was just like, are you good and nice and kind, or are you horrible and you tease everybody? That kind of thing. So I think my main kind of way of raising and looking at the world was based on that, as opposed to the teasing aspect of things. I think somehow I managed to focus on that aspect, and I got more joy out of that than the teasing. And it was quite odd because one of the main culprits, I could literally remember the guy's name now, is a guy called Lee, and he probably teased me most in primary school than I'd ever been teased sort of in secondary school or moving up to teenager 20s ever. And I think that really sat with me, because even though that was going on with me, I automatically thought I do not want anyone else to have to go through this with anyone like that. So it kind of made me the person that, like, I'm not going to let anyone that I love get teased, or I'm not going to be around somebody that bullies people.
Yes,
that kind of thing. So I think that's probably made me more the way I am, where I won't put up with a bully, especially for myself, but especially for anybody else in my circle at all. So I think that sort of more so galvanized my kind of thought process, really.
Yeah. Kids can be wicked, can't they?
Yeah,
they're really horrible, some of them.
Yeah. You can have that really kind of naive, beautiful, just like everyday spring day, like sit and watch a rose petal for 2 hours kind of adorableness. And then you can have a child that is just literally, I used to think as a child, the way that Lee would think is if he sees you having too good of a day, he has to shut that situation down immediately. That kind of vibe. So it was quite a mixture back in the day.
Yes, I can imagine. Wow, that's a lot before you've even hit your 20s. Now, you alluded to earlier that you probably found out about neurodiversity in your 20s and 30s. What started to make you think, hang on, I might be dyslexic here? Was it children, or how are you kind of thinking, well, what's going on?
It's a good question, because it was really it was a relatively slow process, but I found that the way or the actual subjects I really liked would have been anything sort of like technical drawing, back in the technical drawing, drama I loved, IT, woodwork, anything with a physical component to it, I dug it. And I could understand that even at, my sort of 5, 6, 7, 10-year-old brain. I could understand that as well as a teacher, and which I kind of thought was just me, and I didn't want to tell anybody because I thought there was something wrong with my head, but I could kind of similar to how we were talking about at the show, I could see things in exploded diagrams. So I could see something and see it exploded and see how that component connects to that component. that links to that, and that's how it works. Whereas other children just wouldn't be able to see that taken apart kind of exploded diagram. They could only see what they see in front of them. So that gave me the inkling that I was kind of thinking on a different wavelength. So it stopped me from thinking I'm just, I guess you could say, essentially not as clever as everybody else, stupid, dumb, whatever the phrase may be.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, I just think differently. Even young guys, I said, I just see things differently. I have different sense of humor. I'm very comfortable in my own company. And kind of contrary to what I do as a job now, I'm very introverted. So, I can do all the talking and all the presenting and so on. But then after that, I need an hour to recharge, tinkering with a classic car, messing about with my model cars. That's my sort of regeneration kind of thing, really. So that's how it came about.
Yeah.
And it was a teacher that I had at Charles King College when I was studying, I think I was studying sports science. And we typically, as with most exams, you have to sort of sit down and there's a question answer or written question, and you have to write your reply back. And I'd done this, and the teacher that I had knew I could answer these questions. He knew I knew it inside out, back to front. But he'd seen the results, and he goes, these results are terrible. These are the results of somebody that doesn't know the subject. And he kind of tweets me on, he goes, I think you might have a dyslexia. So he was really cool. He was like one of the coolest cats, that sort of marked what I managed to do today. And he was like, what we're going to do? We're going to do this test again. I'm going to ask you the questions, and you're just going to draw them on the board, or you're just going to articulate them back to me. You're just going to give me the answers verbally. And then I got 100% immediately. And that was the weirdest thing, because it was literally like I was not trying. He asked a question before the question had finished. I already had an answer. I could already draw on the board. I could show how the muscles break down, the kinesiology aspect of things. It was kind of like I was working on turbocharge, but so easy. But then, you give me the paper to write it on, and I would be sweating.
So it's really interesting. That's kind of a common dyslexic trait. And you're a bit like myself, who loves mechanical things, and how mechanical things come apart. And I remember being at college with being able to do all the verbal stuff, and they're like, what's this part of the engine? What's it do? How does it do that? Get massively high on that bit of the class test, and then they're just about pull my average up for any written stuff.
Get you totally. Yeah, really do.
Yeah. So did that lead to a more formal diagnosis if your teacher was then helping you out with that? They're like, right, hang on.
Yeah, well, that was really weird, because back then, I was probably sort of 15, 16, 17. So back then, they weren't conducting formal diagnoses as a proper thing. So it was almost as if that kind of gave me the little ignition to think, okay, this is how I think. And then I started looking into it. I was going to say reading books, but reading books as best I could, listening to audio books, and then studying it myself as far as, what dyslexia looks like in a person, even down to how it can differ from one person to the other. And then obviously back before we had sort of the word of neurodiversity, but just how the brain works. So although it was a bit unfortunate that it wasn't diagnosed as far as, okay, you have dyslexia, this is that, I think it helped me, because it allowed me to go way deeper down to how the brain chemistry works, like synapses, and how, what fires off a dyslexic or a neurodiverse brain compared to somebody else that isn't neurodiverse. So I think if I maybe just had the diagnosis of being dyslexic, I'd have just said, okay, cool, that's it. And just give me the easiest way to study, and I'll work with that. But I think with me kind of having, kind of similar to yourself, having that kind of, I guess, like engineering brain, all of a sudden I wanted to know why it happens, what in the brain causes this, what can I make my brain function better, even if it doesn't function as a person without dyslexia or neurodiversity. How can I make it still work the best it can in regards to that? So it was a bit of a different way around it, but I think again it's one of those things that hopefully made me a little bit more clued into things more than most in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Is there any dyslexia in your family? Now you know that with you, and you have to look back.
Yeah, I think now looking back at it, it's a bit of a twofold thing, because I know with my mum and dad, their spelling would have been different from people of their age that had grown up in England. But part of that is down to them being raised in patois, it's sort of the Jamaican English language. So as part of that, naturally, your spelling's differently because it's more based on phonetics. So essentially, how a word sounds would be how it's spelt. Very much more so than it would be, typically. So I was raised on that basis. So if I could sort of sound a word in my head, I would put it down on paper how it's spelt, even breaking it down into sections at times. So I think there may have been a slight amount probably with my mum and dad, but again, I think the difficulty could have been just because they were literally coming from a different language to the sort of English language that we know over in the UK, really.
Yeah, and it's hard to split the signal from the noise then, isn't it? Like, is it the different language, or is there a bit of a diversity going on?
It is, yeah. It really is to know that differentiator. But I know with our kids, we sort of have a bit of a mix of sort of the neurodiversity to a point, but they're both really good at sort of, one's super good at the engineering side of things, and then our youngest is just like good at the kind of similar with yourself, good at the technical side. So he can, edit a podcast and also very good at sort of speaking in public, far more so than you would think somebody at 20 years old. Because sometimes in your 20s, you're just finding your feet and finding your voice, literally. So I kind of hope that's come from me, because one of the things I always wanted to do was to show our kids, and also, show the kids that I work with, that the dyslexia is not a disadvantage. It's kind of like a superpower. It just means you're not great at this, but you are going to be far ahead, almost elite level at something else. It's just finding out what that is for you. Yes,
definitely. And I think it's good to teach them that balance. And I think the sort of general conversation on neurodiversity hopefully is showing that balance more than the sort of deficit thinking that you were used to as a youngster.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
I want to take a dive into your interest in fitness. Now, you alluded to being overweight as a youngster. You're clearly more into the technical things, so you just went for human bodies rather than machines. And you did allude to the fact that it was just sort of 16, 17, you were doing that exam where your teacher was helping you out, and it was clearly anatomy.
Yeah.
So what sparked the interest in you, like fitness and how people mechanically work? Where did that all come from?
Yeah, and again, that was probably towards the latter part of my secondary schooling. And I remember, it's a story that normally gets a few giggles, but you might remember that sort of back in sort of secondary school, where you could almost guarantee if it was a rainy, horrible day, the PE teachers would pick that day to go cross-country running.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. just the worst, never a day like we're having today, just the worst day. You wouldn't even want to, go outside. So,
if it was snowing, we're going cross-country running. Yeah.
Just cross-country running in your T-shirt and shorts. Like that was the vibe. So,
with blue hands,
exactly. Blue hands. So we seemed to have a lot of those in Leicester. We had a lot of grey days like that. And the teachers would always pick those days for cross-country running. And as you can imagine, back then, it was just before I hit my growth spurt and things had changed. But I was, the slowest. I hated it the most. I was not entertaining the idea. So there came a stage where one of the PE teachers said to me, "Here, Steve, look, here's the key to the gym. I know you hate this cross-country running. I'm not going to subject you to it anymore. You're too big for this. Go in the gym and enjoy yourself." So for probably about 6 or 7 months, with PE being twice a week, I had the key to our little school gym. And I got to tinker around with all the equipment, all the bits and pieces by myself in my own company, and got to know how things would feel in your body, how your legs should feel after doing squats or leg extensions and back rows and so on. And then when my daddy heard about this, I remember my daddy coming back from work. He was an engineer. He was a fettler in Leicester. So he was an engineer. And he came back with the Arnold Schwarzenegger book of anatomy. big book.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, if you're going to do this training stuff, son, you need to know what everything is. So here's the book. And I was like, no, this is crazy, Daddy. Thank you. And I had the book. And believe me, that book I did reach from page to page. That wasn't even an effort. And so I think that was, again, he was another really formative teacher that sort of seen a little light in me. And from then, that really stemmed. So I started training myself, sort of typically, sort of before you're able to get weights at home, I'm sort of curling the buffet and doing press-ups and sort of crunches up in the room and vibrating the floor and getting them on my family's nerves. And then and then I moved over. We sort of had our summer break, our sort of summer holidays. And when I came back, I, sort of shot up a few inches. And one of my best mates who lived up the road didn't recognize me. He goes, I thought you were a new kid in school. I didn't even know it was you. For the end of the day, so that was quite nice. That was lovely. And that's when I kind of flourished into kind of knowing that my knowledge could help me, because it helped me develop. And I thought, wow, if I could do this with me, maybe I can help others. And that really boosts my confidence, not just on a physical basis, but then when we came back, I was able to sort of play rugby, and they allowed me to train with the Leicester Tigers rugby team, the youth team, and then moved on to playing American football for the Leicester Panthers. So it's a really lovely kind of synergistic rollout from there, with just the confidence getting better and better, as the months went by.
Nice, that's cool. And you just put a growth spot on, found the weight room, and lost the weight all at the same time. Must have been massive.
It was lovely, because it was kind of in your head. It feels like it's taking forever, but it was that sort of literal sort of 6-week period from when you finish school and then you're back to school in September, and like people are like, no, see, nothing, as most people, nothing fit me, but particularly nothing fit me to come to class. So my parents weren't too happy on that side of things, really.
Your belly's no longer bulging out, but your arms are.
It's a whole different fitting, getting the school suit sorted
out. And did you find with the dyslexia that it helped you learn the subjects better with your sort of visual thinking and imagine the mechanics of the body was going once you dived into all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, it's weird, because sometimes when I'm teaching this to other people, or I say that it wasn't even a struggle. It was so weird. I sort of did all the usual things, because as I was growing up, I thought, well, I'm going to study what I like. So, and that included, I remember I did a automotive engineering, BTEC in that, BTEC in electronics, A-level sports drama. And once I got into the sports side of things, it came so naturally that I was able to study 2 courses at the same time, which I never thought I could do. So I was sort of doing A-level drama and also biomechanics, because it in my head, it all made sense. It all kind of meshed together. And it wasn't like 2 separate subjects where maybe somebody else without this sort of way of thinking, they would have had to thought, okay, A-level sports, kinesiology, separate things. I just like, boom, that just links together perfectly. So it was really weird, because that's when I realized that it was, for want of a better word, like a superpower. I could do this. I could picture everything our tutors were saying in regard to how the body works, how the ligaments attach, the bone muscle insertions, all of that kind of stuff. I could see it in my head in real time. So that was crazy, because I thought I was almost going mad a little bit, because for once studying in that aspect felt easy for me, the same way that probably studying would have felt easy for everybody else that was, would have been good at maths or good at English or good at science. It would have felt super easy for them, ridiculously hard for me. This was a total flip around for me. And I'm like, I'm loving this, because it doesn't even feel like I'm trying. I could study, and I would sort of study for half an hour, and then I'd go and train or go out and play or go for a run. And I could almost feel the knowledge sinking in to a point where I knew it was locked in my head and I could move on to something else. So yeah, that really was a huge help for sure.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Just being able to visualize it and move it around. And it shows the difference in experience with suddenly doing stuff you really like. It suits the way you think, that you can sort of put your foot on the gas really and start learning multiple things at once, and it no longer becomes a grind.
Yeah, for sure. It felt so easy. Whereas if I was having to study English or something, that would just, it wouldn't have even worked at all. So yeah, it's literally just finding the right groove for yourself, essentially. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. And post sort of studies, it sounds like you did a lot in the end.
Yeah. When I look back on it, there's sort of masters and degrees, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I don't know how I did it. But because, like you said, because it was the subject matter that I loved, it was kind of just, okay, I know that, so I want to know a bit more. Or maybe the tutor saying, look, you got this, we can maybe move you onto a degree, and then we'll just transfer what you know over to that. So I look back on it, I'm like, I don't know how I had time to do it, but a lot of it was sort of all linked together, which quite helped. Yeah,
help. Certainly. And it's really interesting. But what did you do post all your degree and education? Did you sort of end up setting your own personal training business up by that point, or did you drop into more industry job then?
Yeah, so going from that, it was sort of, I actually, off my first official job, like not apart from glass collecting at the local at the local golf range that me and my mate Raj used to do. I started working for WH Smith's, their distribution place in Leicester, many years ago, back in my 20s. So I had the usual jobs where you sort of temping, and I was working at a bank and so on. And each one of them have lovely memories of. I remember working at Barclays Bank in Leicester, and I was working in the loan section. So, people would come in and apply for loans, and we'd go through the paperwork and it would get filed away. So I started off as a loans clerk, and that job literally involves getting all your paperwork together under your name and filing it away until it's pulled out again. And then when that's needed again, I would go and find your name, pull out your file, and then give it to the person looking at the loan. That was my job. Luckily, we had a radio downstairs in the file room, so I could groove to Radio 1, and it wasn't too bad back then. So as a youngster, I made it work. But even then, I remember one of the loan officers, Phil, and he kind of noticed how I generally got on with people, quite relaxed with people, especially at that sort of 20-year-old age, and, sort of could converse with them. And he was really sweet. I remember him allowing me to not only get the paperwork of this young couple. I think they were going for like their first home, so it was a big deal for them. But he allowed me to get the paperwork, and he allowed me to literally sit with them and let them know they were proof of their loan.
Oh, wow. That's
and
cool.
That was ridiculous, because I knew it was going to be good news. And he goes, Steve, you got this. I'm going to go for a little break. I'll be over here watching you. But yeah, just tell them they got their loan, and, just have a chat with them about their plans for the future, but let them know everything's gone through fine. And I was so gassed with that, because literally coming from a file room 3 stories downstairs in the basement to being up in on a desk facing people that their future relied on what you said, really. The way what you told them really reflected on their future. So after that again gave me the confidence, and I sort of moved into sales. So I started out for a number of companies. I was sort of sales repping or a sales consultant. So I was out on the road, traveling up and down, down to London, all the way up to sort of Scotland, and particularly sort of up north, Leeds, Manchester, Oldham, that side of the world. And I would be away for maybe a week, and I'd be sort of setting up the news agents to stock WH Smith's items. So they would stock our pens, they would stock the magazines, and I would set up the racking, and I would get all the consumables in and do all the points of sale displays. And again, that was, lovely, because then I was able to speak to people. I wasn't relying on having everything written. I could get my personality through to them verbally. And again, when I left that situation, they were happier for it, because they had a display, it was set up nicely, and hopefully that would bring in extra revenue for them. So there'd been a number of jobs along those lines. And it was that kind of thing that in the 20s, nobody really needs you around. Your mum and dad don't need you, so you can kind of go off and do your own thing. So I was really fortunate to do a lot of traveling and a lot of learning from like really nice mentors, really, in regard to how to relate to people. Even now, the subtle nuances of like nonverbal communication that I didn't know I knew back then, but now studying sort of nonverbal communications, I knew I was picking up on the cues of how people reacted when they still had seen me, what kind of energy I need to go in to see them. Is it hyper? Is it smoother? Is it calmer, more sedated? Yeah. And also just taking into account, the difference with people. Some people are more upbeat, some are more kind of level and downbeat and so on. And you got to kind of work with people's vibes. So that put me on a course of sort of working with people. And then moving on to the bodybuilding side of things, I'd started doing natural bodybuilding competitions at 17. And I would be training in my local gym, and some of the guys in the gym would see me training and they'd be like, "Are you doing a competition?" I said, yeah, I do some shows. And they would ask me to train them in the gym. So I ended up getting like a little client base. So I was working out and training people. And it was probably about 6 or 7 years after that when I met my lovely and patient wife, Mandy. We set up our little parkour business, and we'd sort of been growing on from there, really. She puts up with a lot because there's a lot of backing and forth into the gym and sorting out programs and hugely patient. But there's been a great benefit because although I can do all the people sort of the personable side of things, she's great at looking after the website and sorting out the logistics of where I need to be when, and making sure I get a little hour break in between to sort of decompress before I have to do anything else, that kind of thing. So so it all had a really lovely synergistic feel to it. But I think that founding and foundation of dealing with people was the main thing, as well as the knowledge, because it would have been no good me having this knowledge in my head of how things work if I didn't know how to deal with people, and vice versa, really.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you hear that quite a lot from various experts and stuff. Like, it's not just about what you know, it's about being able to deliver it to other people, particularly in the world you're in, with having to train other people.
It's kind of getting that feel for them and sort of taking away their anxiety and just making it fun. I always say to my clients, like, if you don't leave smiling or enjoying it, then I'll give you your money back, because that's more part of it than me beating you into the ground. That's not part of, not part of what we do, sort of thing. So the enjoyment's a huge thing.
Okay. What sort of clients do you tend to have, just to paint a picture? Is it more sort of on the semi-professional or amateur athlete level, or is it sort of general population?
Yeah, it's a really eclectic mixture. So we go from sort of the mums and dads, typically once their children are a bit older and they've got a bit of time, they sort of, are more able to look after themselves and take an hour away, over to the older people that just want to get back into exercise, but nice and gently in a controlled environment. A lot of people that have never been to the gym before, they feel which I can understand totally, I felt it myself, but very intimidated going into a gym. So they kind of want to have a safe space where they can come. It's just me, them. They don't have to be dressed up. They don't have to worry about makeup, looking pretty, nothing. And they can just come and train, and they can make their mistakes and know what to do on each bit of equipment. So when they do go into a gym, they're going in more confident, knowing, okay, that bit of kit works like this. This is what I do on that, and have a program in mind. So then they're walking with their chest held up high, knowing they've got an idea and a plan in mind, as opposed to walking into a gym and then the first person that looks at you funny or maybe whispers something that, isn't necessarily a nice thing can ruin somebody. I've had people come to me that have went into a gym once, overheard somebody say something horrible to them, never went back again, ended up paying for the whole year, but just would rather lose the money than go and risk that humiliation again.
It's terrible. There are some great gyms around, but there are some really poor areas of gym culture as well.
Yes. Yeah, it really can be night and day difference. You can have a lovely gym with really good policies, or what is a lovely gym, but just with poor polishes and poor patrons, I guess, really in there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a shame, really.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I thought would be really interesting to talk about is sort of, I've got it written in my notebook as dyslexia and fitness. Sort of more, I guess, no two dyslexic people are the same, and no two neurodiverse people are the same. But I'm kind of curious about, from a neurodiverse point of view, how you approach fitness. Is there anything that's like the quirk of neurodiversity makes fitness easier, harder, or motivation kind of different? It's just kind of curious to know how that works.
No, that's a cool question. Yeah, because I think for myself, I know for me and a lot of the clients I have, because I think it's one of those things where you may not know it initially with a client. You kind of, somebody comes in and they could be, I mean, we're lucky enough to deal with athletes that, really quite high-ranking athletes, and also deal with or work with neurodiverse children in regard to, building up their self-esteem and work and sort of navigating the world with their neurodiversity, just to, hopefully make them more of a robust person. And I think no matter who I've had, once you get past the facade and the sort of outer layer, everyone has insecurities. I mean, you could be built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you would still have the probably the same insecurities as maybe a 45-year-old lady that's never been into the gym before, and worries that she looks odd in leggings or whatever, that kind of thing. It's just much more convoluted. So I think for me, I always kind of, when I see somebody, I'm always thinking, how do I make sure that they leave here a better human being, not just as far as stronger or maybe having less body fat or bigger muscles or, legs this shape, thighs this shape, but how they can leave the gym a better person as far as being able to deal with the stresses of life. I guess like more robust, like if something horrible happens to you, you can deal with it better than before you would come to me. And a lot of it looking at sort of the mental aspect, whether that's, going to sort of journaling or sort of looking at visualization of if you have like anxieties, because you have a lot of people, again, they'd walk through the door and you think these cats had it all together, but they get really anxious about a company meeting coming up or maybe a family gathering or a wedding. So just helping people deal with the anxiety, not only of the gym, but the anxiety in life, and just sort of, to a degree, using some of the sort of CBT and NLP practices with them, even as I'm training them. So I think for me, the big thing being dyslexic and neurodiverse is I'm never just thinking solely that I'm training somebody just for whatever their goal might be. I'm always thinking, I want you to come out of here in a better mental state than just out of here physically better.
Yeah.
In a way. So I kind of think that's where the sort of dyslexia, probably from my own experiences to a degree, but I think that carries a lot longer, that lasts a lot longer with somebody than just, getting ready for a summer vacation kind of thing, getting in shape for that. This is something that will hopefully carry you on if you do get out of shape, help you to get back into that shape again.
Yes, interesting. And do you find you're able to spot your neurodiverse clients? What now you've got a feel for it at all?
Yeah, that's crazy, because you get a definite inkling and a definite feeling of similarity with yourselves, even little quirks with yourselves. And you can spot it and you can kind of work around it. So especially with the children that I work with, I'm lucky enough to work with a school, and I sort of run clubs and classes for some of the neurodiverse children. So they're able to sort of enjoy themselves in a safe environment. And each one of them's a little bit different, but they're all very similar to a degree. And it is spotting that. And a lot of that goes down to especially with the kids, it's the non-verbal communication, because from what I know as being a kid, and I know working with the children, they pretty much more or less just want to keep pace with you. They don't really want to adults happy. They want to keep their teachers happy.
Yes,
they want to keep their mum and dad happy. Their peers happy. So they sometimes will say things are okay when they're not, or they're happy to do something when they're not, just because everybody else in the class was happy to do this. So it's got to be okay. So I should be happy to do it. So a lot of the work I try to do with them is non-verbal communication to see what they're saying they're really happy with, or whether we need to approach things from a different angle to make sure they're comfortable.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's the whole confidence piece. And I like the fact that when we tie it back to your personal training business, you actually, it's not just about, I don't know, upping your bench press and increasing your deadlift. It's all about the whole person and what they're like, what they're doing outside the gym, how they do. And you mentioned the cognitive behavioral therapy and the linguistic programming, which is easy for some people to say.
It's quite aware. I'm just going to stick to NLP. Now, that is
NLP, yeah, I got all confident then, I think.
You did well.
Yeah, and but it's interesting how you're using all of them techniques to try and deal with, because, you know, my own experience of having been a gym rat for years, you know, I could nail the workout and then eat far too much when I got home, or not sleep enough, or whatever.
And just the same. It's like all the little details outside of that hour in the gym is what makes the difference. So I'm just the same. I must admit, even for me, it's, people would think I've got it all together, but there are challenges at times where I'm just the same as everyone else on that.
And but I like the fact that you use all the other techniques to kind of try and make everybody a bit more rounded, because it's important. But most of the work in terms of keeping fit is actually what you're doing outside of the gym anyway.
Very true. So there's little bits that add up to the bigger result, and even down to a lot of the time. Sometimes we'll have clients that be, you know, they can only sort of come to us for maybe 6 a.m. in the morning, you know, for the pre-workout. Pre-work, and sometimes they'll call and say, Steve, I know it's short notice, but I've had a terrible night's sleep, I might be late or whatever. And I say, look, leave it. I'd rather you rest and chill than drag yourself to a workout that you're not going to do the best in. You might end up pulling something and then putting yourself back 3 or 4 weeks in that sense. So, you know, even as much as odd as it seems for someone in my, I guess, line of work, I'd rather not have somebody come and rest than have somebody come that's still fatigued and tired and, you know, maybe not even in the right mental state, when it might be just better for them to have a day chilling, you know, catching up on their favorite program that they like to binge watch, and then you come back the next day and they're a happy, better person for it, kind of thing. It's that kind of finely tuning it, really.
It is indeed. What got you into the CBT and the NLP? How did you start building that as an arm to your kind of fitness?
That's the good one. That's the story I kind of like in a way. It's a bit of a sad story, but it has a nice ending. So my daddy passed away. He had prostate cancer back in 2014. And it was quite advanced by the time it was diagnosed and so on. So he passed away from that back then. And back then, obviously, with me, I've got a younger sister, Nicola, but obviously I'm the older brother. So in my head, I'm like the next, you know, I'm stepping up to the mark from my daddy sort of thing. So it's kind of looking after my own family as far as the kids and Mandy, but then also making sure my sister's okay, and my niece, and then, you know, that kind of encumbersome bubble. So I found it quite difficult to adjust to that, to the point where if something wasn't planned and I wasn't happy with it in my head, I would automatically say no. So sometimes Mandy would be like, oh, we're going to go see Raj and Sue at the weekend. I'm like, no, we're not doing it because I don't have it planned. I've not got my head programmed for doing that. Okay. I've got plans and this doesn't fit in with my plans. And she sort of pointed out that I didn't seem to be dealing well with things because that was unlike me. I'm much, you know, normally much more flexible, and there's a lot more reasoning with me. So she suggested taking a course of CBT just to help me process my anxiety, my feelings, because pretty much with everybody, and as we're older and we're looking after children and partners and families ourselves, we can have something horrible like that happen to us, but we still have to be husband or wife, mum or dad, The word our company's sports spokesperson. You kind of have to deal with this huge loss, but still, as far as the outside world's concerned, you're still Steve, or you're still carrying on as normal, and you don't get a chance to grieve. And I think the CBT really helped me have the chance to grieve, and also put into place practices to help me deal with my anxiety or feelings that might be coming up, so I could catch them before they took hold, really, and came to fruition. And that's been, it was such a great help. I even remember I had a lovely CBT practitioner helping me, Linda, and she was so lovely. We'd have like a Saturday morning call and have a bit of a chit chat and a catch up, and then she'd go, okay, what have you got coming up that you're feeling anxious about? And I'd say, we've got like a big family meal, and we've got to work out all the logistics. And then she'd give me like a rating of 0 to 10, like 10 being the worst possible thing that could happen, and then 0 being everything's cool and everybody's cool. And she'd let me just run off the worst case scenario, just things like, a dragon coming down from the sky and scooping me up, just things that would never happen. But, if we're going up to level 10, I'm going to take it to a level 10 properly.
It's not half missions here.
Oh, no. We go to the whole dragon aspect, like a transformer coming down and taking me away, that kind of thing.
The whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 So, and then she would catch up with me the following week, and then we'd go over, and normally it would end up being like a 2 or 3, and things would work out great. And slowly that helped to alleviate my anxiety. So even now, when I have something really anxious that I'm nervous or big that I'm anxious about, I still use that same scale, and it never fails to always work out better than what I'm thinking. So as I was going through the practice with her, even in the midst of it, I thought, I really dig this. I want to be able to help other people with it. So even after we did it, then I studied to be a practitioner for that. And then me, with my sort of neurodiverse brain, I wanted to get even deeper, looking into neuro-linguistic training, which is kind of very much along a similar vein, but it's nice to be able to offer the two alongside each other. And being honest, I'm probably the worst person to ask for the difference, because I tend to end up mixing the two together for people, depending on what they need, really.
Right,
that was a great, a sad start to it. But I think my daddy would be proud that we can, help other people now.
And it's nice to you turned what was a sad event in your life around to something that you used to help other people.
That was really nice. I enjoyed that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what I'm going to do now is start rounding out the podcast. And every guest of the podcast gets asked 3 rapid fire questions from me. They don't need quick answers from you. So let's dive into question number 1.
Right.
What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
That somebody with dyslexia couldn't write a book.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. Books are really interesting when I see how many people and people I've interviewed are starting to write books. Wow, really? They seem like it's an intimidating thing to me.
Yeah. Well,
even to this day.
Oddly enough, I'm probably going to be one of them paid people, because since we met at the show, I've started to write a book myself, and it's sort of looking at very similar to how we started, like what it was like in the 70s with dyslexia, how that's growing up, and then looking at what it's like as a teen and 20-year-old, and then looking at it what it's like as an old fart, as I am in the 50s kind of thing, and then just sort of outlining that for everybody, just so hopefully it gives people a nice rounded view, so they can not only see what it's like, but see what it's like in a living, breathing person day to day. And before having the confidence to do that, you could have never imagined I would sit down and write a few chapters on a book. It just would not happen.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I bet you're really interested to see what the book's like when it comes out.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully soon. I'm working, so hopefully soon.
Okay. Now, rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I would say it would be a special superpowers way of thinking and processing the world. Yeah. I think that was how I would explain it. Yeah.
Nice. Very succinct. Okay. And seeing as this podcast is called the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, my final rapid fire question is, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. That's a meaty bad boy. Okay. I like that one. I would say a dyslexia life hack would be, and it kind of stems from me being a teenager, but something I've noticed with a lot of the people I work with, but especially kids and teens and adolescents, is always make sure you're having enough omega-3 healthy fats.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which sounds, it probably sounds very odd, but what I found as myself growing up, and also with other kids, is, sort of being dyslexic or being neurodiverse in like a quote unquote normal world. So like being that in a school or at college or university to at work, your brain's having to think things over like 4 times quicker than someone else.
Yes.
So it uses up so much more energy, more so than a say regular person, but somebody without neurodiversity, that you can very quickly become fatigued and tired and worn out if you're not having enough healthy fats. I mean, obviously enough food generally, but particularly enough healthy fats to feed your brain and to keep the synapses and the myelin sheath working, all of the sort of brain connections firing. That can be one of the biggest downfalls if you're not aware of that. So I always preach to even the parents I work with is be really focused on that, because your children or your adolescents, or even us as older adults, we're using up a lot more energy just trying to navigate the world from our neurodiverse standpoint.
That's really interesting. Yeah, using the healthy fats to fuel the brains. How? Let's nerd out for a minute then. Any recommendations of what omega-3s people should be taking and how much?
Oh, that's a nice one. I like it. Cool. I can do this all day long now. You got me now. I'm locked in. I would say fish oils are really good. So, you get the fish oil capsules. Probably about 1,000. I think they come in roughly a good 1,000 milligram dose. Probably about 3 of those a day would be a good dosage.
Wow. Okay.
But if you like the liquids, which I was raised on, I was forced to drink cod liver oil.
Yeah.
By liquid. My mum and dad were old school. We weren't messing about with capsules then. If you're happy with that. Yeah, back in the day. If you're happy doing those, then 3 capsules of those, that's a good level. Obviously, things such as salmon, fatty fish. So salmon's really good. Tuna's really good in sunflower oil. Your peanuts, pretty much any of those are really good. And also something I'm putting into my shakes at the moment, which I really love, is hemp seed oil. So I put like 3 capsules into my protein shake, and that works really well because you can't taste it, and it's predominantly higher in the omega-3s than the other fats, which the other fats you tend to get plenty of day to day. But it's just that omega-3 you need to really focus on. So that has the predominancy on the omega-3s.
Nice. And I assume you do have to slightly watch your calories as well.
Yes, I've got to be good, because there were times back in the old days I could chug a whole load of that down and not worry about the calories. But nowadays, even I've got to be careful on that. Yeah,
I was thinking, it's peanuts, great, peanut butter and everything, but
the number of times I got through a packet of peanuts and walnuts or cashew nuts. And then regretted it the next day. Very easily done.
with all of that health advice, particularly the last bit, that just brings me to ask: where can people find you, and is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
Oh, thank you. Well, we can always be found at Parke.com, which is our website. So it's PARKECORE, sort of a play on the name, all as one word, .com. We have an email address, which is parkour@gmail.com, which you can contact me on about anything, whether that's the sort of physical training for children or adults, the mental health side of things, or working with neurodiversity in schools and children, or mentorship. We can sort of cover all aspects of that, really. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, got a fair bit going on there. Wow.
Yeah, keeps me out of trouble. Yeah, keeps me out of the house. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that just leaves me to thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. It's been great talking to you, and it's really interesting.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Anytime again. It's really been lovely to chat with you.
Thank you very much. And it just leaves me to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.